the series that we're looking at is looking at 3 paintings, each of which encapsulates an era. And the era that we're looking at today is, of course, the Luncheon of the Boating Party by Renoir. Now, wouldn't we all love to be there? First of all, in Paris, and secondly, on a lovely warm day, as opposed to where we are now. And what Renoir has done is capture a perfect moment of harmony. A group of friends who have just finished their lunch and have got up and are moving around the table to chat. Now, it looks as though this empty space here would have been where Renoir himself would have been. It's as if he moved away from the table to take a photograph, the sort of thing that we would do now with our phones. And he has captured this group of very sort of select group of people who are painters, journalists, art critics, actresses, models, sportsmen, administrators. And these are people who will have made him the successful painter that he is by 1881. He will become one of the most successful of the Impressionist painters because he moves to painting portraits, and particularly portraits of the bourgeoisie. But he's also a very sort of sensual painter in the sort of sort of erotic sort of sense of the word. And he captures the warmth and the interaction of this group. You have the idea of taste. You can taste there's all the sort of different types of wines, and there's the grapes, there's the end of a meal. There is the sound of the flapping of the breeze. You can see the way in which he's managed to make the awning flap up and down. There is the sight, of course, of these beautiful headdresses, these beautiful hats, the beautiful people in a lovely setting. And there's also the sense of touch, which Renoir excels at foregrounding in his paintings, even though, I mean, they are only paintings. You get very much this idea of everyone is touching everyone else or is engaging with everyone else. So you have groups of people. Here you have a group here, which is sort of in a pyramidal form, 3 people, always more men than women, women as being sort of, encompassed by men. Another group of 3 people over here, a group here in many ways, even though she's looking out towards us, these 2 are chatting. You have this triangular form that comes here that pulls you in this direction. You also have the rail which pulls you out in that direction. You have the body of Alphonse, which forms as this large sort of vertical here to anchor the foreground. So it's a painting then which is harmonious, not just for its subject matter, but in its structure. Now, Renoir, as I said, at this time was successful. By 1881, he had well gone past his impecunious early years. Now, he was born, as you can see, in 1841. I just want to talk about him a little bit. I know some of you have been reading Renoir's biography by his son. He was born in Limoges from a relatively poor background. And at this time, this is the time of the Second Empire, when Paris is becoming a great magnet. People who wanted to make their fortune gravitate towards Paris. And Renoir's family comes and lives in Paris, and lives in Rue d'Argenteuil, which is very close to Rue Saint-Honoré and very close to the Louvre. It's a very, very chic part of Paris now. It wasn't so much at the time. Uh, he originally was actually very good at singing, but the parents didn't have enough money to pursue this. And so he ends up, they see that he has talent as a decorative artist, and you will see that, of course, in his work. It is a very decorative style. It's not a cerebral style, as you'll see with K-Bot. He then begins painting, has to earn a living, and he decorates fans, he decorates wallpaper, he actually even decorates china. But of course, the china industry becomes, the manufacturing and the painting becomes done by machines, and he finds life very difficult. He, however, enters the École des Beaux-Arts, can't actually get in there, he fails, and goes to the Atelier of Glaire, where he will meet Monet and Sisley, which was a very, very, very important meeting for him. So, as you know, he will then fall in with the group. This is the Batignolles group shown here, with Manet as its head, of course, who never actually exhibits with the Impressionists. Here we have Bazille, you have Monet, and you have Renoir here, and of course the person who is going to be very instrumental in bringing the work of the Impressionists to the general public, written word, will be Émile Zola. So he joins this group, as you know, but still is extremely poor, and is always supported by the wealthier members of the group. And the wealthier members of the Impressionist group, one of whom is Bazille, who you saw just a moment ago. And Bazille shares his little, really tiny little apartment opposite the École des Beaux-Arts with Renoir, and they paint each other's portrait. This is Bazille's portrait of Renoir, and that was the opposite. Bazille, unfortunately, will be killed in the Franco-Prussian War. The group meet in Pigalle. Those of you who've been to Paris with me would know this corner. This was the Café de la Nouvelle Athènes, which was only, well, in about the last 15 years was torn down and is now a kind of monoprix, unfortunately. But that's where the group used to meet and nut out their agenda, the Impressionist agenda, and support each other when things were very tough. Now, Renoir will go on to become extremely wealthy, but at the beginning he only exhibits in the first three Impressionist exhibitions from 1876, 77, 78, and then tries his luck with the traditional salon painting. And in the seventh exhibition, his paintings will be put in by his dealer, who still thinks that it's a good idea to exhibit with this group. So by the time that he is actually painting the painting that we are looking at, he already has become quite a well-known painter, particularly in that group of upper middle class people who want portraits done. So he's going to turn away in many ways from the scenes of Paris that we know. Now, I just wanted to show you these two paintings, which one doesn't really associate, of course, with the Impressionists, and particularly not with, well, the other Impressionists, but maybe one should when one thinks of Renoir. This is the Rococo work of Boucher, with these nudes, these pink and white nudes, young flesh exhibited, this idea of the fleeting nature of life, seize pleasure while you can. This was a reaction, of course, against the sort of heaviness of the art of Louis XIV. But you need to keep that in mind when you actually look at Renoir's nudes, and don't just think of him as an impressionist who actually paints landscapes, because he's going to leave those to some extent and concentrate very much on nudes. That is going to be something that he excels at. He's also very influenced by Rubens. He sees both of these artists at the Louvre, which are very close to where he lives. And he will be very, very influenced by these rather opulent female forms that he will go back to at the end of his life. Now, 5 years earlier, he had painted this other sort of landmark painting. When one thinks of Renoir, I think one thinks of this painting and the one that we are studying. Now, this, of course, was typical of life in the city. It's the painting of modern life. And the painting that we're going to be looking at, The Luncheon of the Boating Party, is a departure from that. He's going to leave the city and go out to the outskirts of Paris. But at this time in 1876, he is still resolutely, and throughout his life indeed, optimistic. I mean, the paintings that he have are always of a sunny day, of perfect relationships, perfect male-female relationships, a coupling, which you have all the way around, beautiful young people eating, drinking without a care in the world. And this was a decision, I think, this is 1876, in the wake of dreadful civil war, which had taken place in 1871 at the Commune of Paris. And I just want to show you, just down the road, 5 years earlier, literally down the road from where Renoir painted the Moulin de la Galette, was where the people, the communards, who had actually taken part in this uprising against the French government, were taken out, stood against the wall and shot. Now, this actually is a reconstruction of, this is a photograph which is taken to reenact what happened. It's not an on-the-spot photograph, but it gives you this idea of this extraordinary civil war. That, as you know, the problem was that the Parisians wouldn't accept the terms of the treaty with the Prussians and decided that they would hold out. They formed the first Commune, the communists of Commune, and the government, French government, which had worked out the treaty with the Prussians, actually had to go outside Paris. In the end, the French government, Republican government, actually get enough troops and storm back into the city. And in the bloody week of May, many, many thousands of people die or are sent off into exile. This is the barricades that were built up by the poor, I suppose, of Paris, particularly around Montmartre. All of these great Haussmannian boulevards are blocked off. Here they have photographs of themselves as the troops, their own troops. The Prussians are actually camped on the outside watching this happen as the French, kill each other off. As the French come in through a breach in the wall, the communards, retire back towards the beginning of the city and burn major buildings. So this is the Tuileries Palace, which was burnt, as you can see here. This is the Arc de Carrousel, and the Louvre also was set alight, but they managed to get put out the flames. But this is the Hôtel de Ville, which was lit as well with these amazing frescoes which had been painted by Delacroix. So getting back then to Renoir, if you look at his paintings, there is not even a reference to this extraordinarily stressful time with Frenchmen or Parisians fighting each other, and particularly where it took place actually round, all the fighting was all around this Moulin de la Galette. Now, the other thing that I want to mention here, when one thinks of Impressionist painting, is that we always talk about the importance of light, the importance of science of light, which is what the Impressionists were doing. You can see here in this particular painting, it looks unfinished because Renoir is trying to capture the moment when you actually get the sunlight flitting across objects, and the objects change according to the light. You know, there is no such thing as a paradigm of a hat. It looks different according to the light that it's under. So there is all of the studies of light and how it's composed, what it's made up of, and how things look in the light. But there's also another aspect of light, which I think is worth discussing. And this was the lighting which has been installed in Paris during the Second Empire, particularly in the 1850s. Now, those of you who know Paris will know that particularly around the center, you can tell if you're at an important place because of the number of globes or lanterns on a particular lamppost. If there's only one, you know it's a minor street. By the time you get to the Place de la Concorde, you know, the enormous posts with beautiful lanterns. Now, Paris had already earned the name as being the city of light during the 18th century because of the Enlightenment, literally, of ideas of Voltaire and Rousseau and so on. But it was had also been lit, was one of the first cities to have any kind of lighting at all. Now, I mean, it's very hard for us to think of this, of a city that was dark at night. So if you went out at night, if you had enough money, someone walked along in front of you with a flaming torch to show you the way. And the city was a very dangerous place. You know, there were gangs who would ambush you as you went along. And so Louis XIV actually begins this idea of lighting the city at night and gets people to actually put lamps or candles in their windows so that there is some kind of light in the center anyhow. And this then is taken up at the end of the 18th century by oil lamps, which were strung between trees. But of course the oil would burn out and there were very few of them, but at least it gave some kind of glow. And this was most unusual. Most cities, particularly London, were deathly dark at night. Which means actually that there was a whole way of living during the night. There were people called chiffonniers, rag pickers, who used to come down into the city and pick up things at night. There was a whole life at night, which will gradually disappear when lighting appears. Now, in the 1850s, you get the development of gas lighting. And by the end of the century, there'll be thousands, like 25,000 gas lights, which of course have to be lit every night and turned out. So there was, you know, it employed a huge number of people, but it gave Paris that sort of beautiful glow that it is depicted in so many of the paintings of the time. Now, Charles Courin was an American impressionist who came over and painted, and here you have the sort of glowing of the lamps that you can see here. So this is a very, very different from the light that you're going to get when you get electricity. So there's this fascination with the city, with lightness and darkness at night, these nocturnes. Now, you get the development in the 1880s of electricity. Edison, and there's a big exhibition in 1881 in Paris, which is the Exposition de l'Électricité, display of, what would you call it, an exhibition of electric light, where Edison's arc lights are shown. And for a while, you're going to actually get gas lights and electric lights together in Paris. In fact, gaslight, the last gas lights only disappear in 1962 in France. Now, what is interesting then in the Impressionist works that you see, when we're talking about light and we're looking at the interiors, we're actually looking at electric light. And you can see that Manet here is looking at the effect of electricity here. Now, this is a completely different type of light, as you can see. It's white, it's bright, and it brings out different features, as we'll see in a moment. But with the development of electricity, there was a huge sort of explosion, if you could put it that way, of nightlife. You have huge, doubling or tripling of the number of nightclubs, of bistros and restaurants and cabarets. It's much safer now to have these lights, much safer than when you actually had the gas lights. Now, I think this gives you a very good idea of how the Impressionists saw this new type of light. Can you see it's glaring? Can you see that? You can see that obviously there's a source of light coming up here onto her face, with the whiteness of her face here and the sort of accentuation of different colors here. And of course, out in the foliage also you have these brilliant white lights, which are so different from the gas lights that you would have seen with it when gas is depicted. So what I'm really trying to say is that what the lighting that we look at in Impressionist art is not just the scientific development of the breakdown of light and how it makes things look different. It's also showing this change and accommodation of a new light form, or éclairage. Now, getting on to this, now what was I going to say about this? Now, getting back onto our painting, which of course is in the daytime, and it doesn't, that isn't really relevant to the painting we're looking at. But I thought it was an interesting point to look at in the history of Paris. Now, where are these people? They are outside Paris. Now, they are a boating party. They've obviously, people now come down the Seine to this restaurant called La Fournaise, named after the man who actually owned it, Alphonse Fournaise. And here you can see the boats, which would be a little boat here. There's a landing here. You have people would come up and sit on the balcony here. We have been there many times, those of you who have been with me to Paris. This is the Church of Château in the background. Now, what is important about this is what it looks like now. This is where this would have been painted. There's the awning, which still exists. It's recently been renovated. Now, this was outside Paris. So the Impressionists and all of these people who by 1881 now have leisure time. The workers as well now have a day off, and they would get on the train, and this is something we'll talk about in a moment, in the 9th arrondissement on the Gare Saint-Lazare, and go out on the train line out to Château, which is on the Seine. This would probably take about I don't know, probably 20 minutes in the train. Now, this was a revolutionary move for people at the time. We think of trains, of course, as being absolutely banal. But at the time, train travel was something very new. And it was the big stations that accommodated these trains were celebrated by the Impressionists. They were very much part of the reconstruction of Paris by Haussmann, who wanted the city to be an open city, and so he puts large railway stations at the sort of 4 cardinal points so that people can come in, workers can come in, but also with the development of leisure time, people can go out of Paris. So here we have a sort of a typical scene of Monet. He actually lived near the Gare Saint-Lazare, and he is actually showing this other side of the importance of light for the Impressionists, the way in which very heavy things dissolve under light. So he's looking at steam, he's looking at clouds, he's looking at reflections through glass. And in fact, these stations in many ways are the cathedrals of modernity. You know, no longer do we need cathedrals to pray in, but the new way forward, the invention of modern life, is seen in these enormous stations. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. This is what it looks like under COVID, but it still hasn't changed very much. It's still there. It still has these enormous glass panes letting in the light. This was new architecture, you know, big panes of glass, steel girders. This, of course, is what Haussmann has done to Paris, cut through these enormous avenues, divided Paris, cut the workers from the centre, sent them to the outskirts. We all know, I think most of you who are on this call know the story of Haussmannian Paris. This is the old Paris, which will be destroyed. As you can see, no footpaths, no gutters, no light. Extremely sort of decrepit, old, insalubrious Paris, which will disappear when these great avenues are formed. And at the end of the great avenues, you will have the new cathedrals, which will be the railway stations. Out from the railway stations, you have the massive bridges which will be built to span the Seine. And this is the one over the Seine near the Ile des Impressionnistes. And here you can see it in the background, just in the background of the luncheon of the voting party. Now, the other thing which was of interest at this time, apart from being able to actually get on a train quite cheaply and go out to the countryside and paint en plein air, you know, this is why you get a plein air painters, because the countryside is now easily accessible to them, is the inventions of paintings as well. You now have portable easels which have been developed, small canvases which can be folded up, and tubes of paint. Up until then, you actually had to mix your paints, which was very painstaking, whereas now paint can be stored in tubes and taken out in a backpack. You can set yourself up really easily and actually paint, fold everything up and come back. Sorry, I keep going the wrong direction. So this indeed is what Renoir will start to do. He becomes interested in plein air painting and goes out on the train from the Gare Saint-Lazare with his great friend Monet, who he will have met, as you have heard, at the Institut Glaire in Paris. And they are going to experiment then with these new ideas of painting, the painting of modern life. It's no longer painting mythological subjects, it's no longer painting history subjects, it's actually just painting what is happening at the time. And you'll see that he paints alongside Monet, but Monet will always be much more interested in the landscape and the light, whereas Renoir, in a parallel painting, will be interested in the figures, and particularly actually in the clothes as well. The female figures, as you can see, dominate. The men are just rather dark objects which set the women off. So here you have this idea that the painting is, you know, that you're not actually looking into a, you know, reality. This is a painting, and you can tell it's a painting because you actually have brush strokes which are obvious. And what is a painting? It is paint on canvas, and it has been made by an artist. So the artist is actually introducing himself into the painting, and it is the subject matter of modern life and the movement which counts. Now you will see this is La Grenouillère by Monet. All right, can you see very, 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 well, it's not different, but they've painted almost from exactly the same point of view. Sometimes they used each other's canvases. Now, they were extremely poor, and they will be supported, as we'll see later, by other members of the Impressionist group, particularly by Kay Bott, and also by Bazille. Now, what is La Grenouillère? La Grenouillère means the frog hole, and the frog is a slang word for prostitutes. And the Grenouillère was a kind of a cabaret or a guinguette. A guinguette was a place where you drank wine, which was not really quite, you know, the grapes hadn't really been ripened properly, and they were a bit green, and so they were called a guinguette. I'm sorry, people are just buzzing me on my phone. A lot of working class girls would come out during the day or on the weekend or on the Sunday, and come out. And if you want to read about this, you can read about this in Maupassant, and come out and have fish and chips and then go back. So in many ways, it was, you know, it was a down market place. This little place here that they've actually it's just this Grenouillère was just a little bit further along the river from La Fournaise that we've seen. All right, so if you kept pottering along in a boat, if you actually had enough money to hire a boat, you would eventually come out at the Grenouillère, and this was called the Camembert. This was a little island where people would come and sit. You've even got people bathing. Unfortunately, the tides now have changed in the Seine, and this has been submerged, but you can actually walk along the Seine and see exactly where this was painted. Now, I just wanted to show you, this is the ball of the Grenouillère. This is Thursdays. You have the young fellows here looking very sort of, you know, sporty. This, of course, is later than the time that we're looking at it. I mean, we now have women actually in very skimpy bathing suits, and actually sort of being able to not exactly swim, but at least knowing how to float, with extraordinary hats as well. All right, and you see departure from Paris at the Gare Saint-Lazare, and it is at 35 minutes past the hour, and you can get back up until 11:30 at night. Now, these are some of the young ladies who, you know, weren't really, you know, it says young ladies on the banks of the Seine. Now, no respectable young lady would be seen collapsed, showing her feet with her petticoats being shown, making out she's asleep on the banks of the Seine. These obviously are girls looking out for an opportunity, either to catch a young blade or who were actually prostitutes as well. Well, getting back to the painting now, I want to actually just look a little bit at the structure. The way in which this table goes off into the distance with this vanishing point and people around it reminds me very much of this painting here, which we will be looking at next week. Can you see the way in which this disappears into the distance, and you have these people milling around? So Renoir was very conscious of these other paintings, and of course, having lived near the Louvre, would have seen Veronese's wedding at Cana, would have spent some time looking at it. Now, I just wanted to show that in this painting that we're going to look at in much greater detail, there are three styles. First of all, he is a landscape painter here. So here he's using the Impressionist style of these very rapid brush strokes to show us the vegetation and the boats in the back, and the bridge coming over, the flickering of the canvas. Oh, I'll keep doing that. You also have portraits, which we're going to look at in great detail for the rest of this lecture, but also still life, very much in the continuation of Dutch still life. And of course, again, Renoir would have seen these in the Louvre. There was quite a considerable collection of Dutch still life with, you know, the memento mori, these ideas of, you know, watch, look at this and remember that these things, you are going to die. So all of these aspects are incorporated in this particular painting, which really is, I think, a masterpiece, and that's quite something for me to say about Renoir. Now, I want now to look at these people who constitute the painting, because the painting is about his friends. He goes out there and he says, you could find me at any time at Fournaise. There I was fortunate enough to find as many splendid creatures as I could possibly desire to paint. And of course, he's not referring to Alphonse here, but to Arlene and to the other women, as we know. But he actually used to come out here regularly, and in fact spent quite a bit of time out here painting this particular work, even though he would go back and work on it in his studio. Now, the first person that we want to look at is Alphonse Fournaise. Now, you would sort of think, well, you know, he looks like a bit of a ruffian. I mean, this is a group of quite sophisticated people that we have in the luncheon of the boating party, as opposed to that group of people that we saw at the Bal du Moulin de la Galette. And here it looks as though he's like a tradie, you know, someone in a singlet now with these muscly arms and a beard and, you know, the hat. He looks as though he's, you know, we wouldn't be able to identify him as someone who is at the cutting edge. It'd be the equivalent of the way in which he's dressed as someone who has sophisticated tats now. Now, this is important because there was, at this time in the 1880s, and remember that in 1900 you will have the Olympic Games, which are sort of developed in, well, set in Paris, and before that you'll have the first modern Olympic Games, which are set in Athens again, developed by a French aristocrat, Alain de Courboutin. Now, this is because sport was something which was becoming important. It really related very much to the ideas of the time, that there was a sense that one could evolve, you know, with Darwin's ideas, but one could also degenerate. Evolution wasn't necessarily in one direction. And so there are movements of sport that develop in Sweden, in Germany, and in England in particular. So in Germany and Sweden, you have the development, well, in Germany, you get this kind of cross-country, sort of those sorts of sports. In Sweden, you had the kind of more gymnastic things, or, you know, twirling objects and moving limbs. And in England, you get the development of competitive sport. And this was, of course, produced very much in the private schools and the private you know, in Eton and then, of course, later on in Oxford and Cambridge. And it was supposed to instill a sense of self-discipline. You know, team sports was supposed to mean that you could work with people. There was discipline, there was self-sacrifice, there was stoicism, and these were characteristics that were needed if England was going to send out people to manage the rest of the empire, particularly, you know, in the East India Company and so on. Now, in France, this filters through into the 1871, where you get the defeat of Napoleon III during the Franco-Prussian War. And the French think that this is partially because the citizens have become too weak. You know, we'll see this when we're actually looking at absinthe and so on. And so it becomes, they import many of these ideas of sport as being particularly for men. I mean, it wasn't something that women were supposed to do. Women were supposed to be rather feeble and corseted, so you couldn't do this. But a sound mind and a sound body was something which was becoming quite cutting edge in France. So against degeneration of the race, you are going to have people who now on the weekend go out and do a sport, and boating was one of the sort of leisure and sporting activities taken on by the middle class, and also by this sort of sophisticated, trendy group that Renoir would hang out with. So here again, you have the rower's lunch. Here he is again, seated in this outfit, which distinguishes him as a sportsman. Here, of course, you can see that, you know, they have special outfits and so on, but you know, women, of course, if they actually fell in, were basically at risk of drowning. Remember Victor Hugo's daughter, Leopoldine, on her honeymoon goes out boating with her husband. The little boat capsizes and she is dragged to the bottom by her skirts. So sports, these water sports, were very much for men. Now, the next person we look at here is Alphonsine. Now, this is his sister. We won't have very much to say about her, but simply that she actually anchors this triangle. If you go up through here, and the triangle that goes through there, through these heads and through here. And of course, she is in a particularly flirtatious mode. You know, she's not sitting there bellowing out instructions. She's looking cute. You know, she's with the kind of come hither, oh, aren't you interesting conversation with this particular gentleman who we'll look at later. So women are always seen as, you know, objects of attention, not people who are, you know, have any subjectivity. She's there because she's being looked at by this particular man. Oh, there she is there. I do actually have to say that this painting, just very briefly comment on it, you can actually see the way in which this orange has been added. And I think one of the greatest disappointments in my life is when I finally saw this painting in the Phillips collection in Washington. No, not Washington. Yes, in Washington. And it has been restored, overly restored. And so these pieces, you know, these little brush strokes of orange just really sort of lift off the canvas, and they look as though they've been added afterwards. It's a great pity. It's a restoration which has gone wrong. Here she is again, painted again in that same pose, again with the bridge behind. Well, we're now going to look at this particular person here, who is Caillebotte. There he is there, the center of this. Now this lecture, I think, is actually going to be quite long. Have I been talking for an hour already? Good God. All right, well, I'm just going to keep going. This is Cabot, who we've often spoken about, who was very important for a number of reasons. Firstly, as a painter, he has not been appreciated. It's only very recently that people have begun looking at his art. He was important at the time because he was wealthy, and he was the patron of the artists who really couldn't make any money. So particularly Monet. He actually paid for Monet's little apartment near the Gare Saint-Lazare so that Monet could come in from the countryside and work at the station. That's how come we actually have those paintings. And when he died, and he died very young of a heart attack, he had already willed his collection to the state. The basis of the collection at the Musée d'Orsay comes from the collection of Gustave Cabot. Many of it was rejected because at the time the people who governed the Louvre didn't think that it was worth having impressionist art in the collection. It was Renoir, who was his great friend, who actually constantly petitions the government to accept the legacy of Cabot. Now, Cabot wasn't just an artist, he also was a boat builder, as we'll see, and also was very good at making knitting patterns. Now, I'll finally get this. I have to turn it backwards. I thought this was interesting to show you a very different type of lunch. Here he belonged to the middle classes. Here he would have had his mansion on probably the Boulevard Haussmann. Here with Renoir's painting, of course, we go into the painting from the front of the table, but here you sort of actually hover over the plate, so you actually have the impression that the artist is here. It's a very cold image. No one is touching anyone else. No one is really communicating with anyone else. The colors are very dark. This absolute antithesis of the sensuality, the gaiety, the warmth, the conviviality of the painting of Renoir. So this is the painting of the upper middle classes. I mean, this fellow also has no manners. He's already eating before his mother's even had her been served by the butler, who has kept her distance. Also, this emphasis on these rather cold glassware as well, as opposed to the glassware that we see under the sun at the luncheon of the boating party. He is, of course, the painter of all around, from the Gare Saint-Lazare all around to the Boulevard Haussmann. We can actually, is a number of blocks of paintings, but he's the painting of Haussmann in Paris, and critical of it, the way in which it goes on forever, dominated by the middle class. And of course, we have this wonderful painting here, which is dominated in the middle by this lamppost, as I was talking about before. Even though it's not being used, it was such a feature that it's actually the central axis of the painting. All right, so here he paints a different type of Paris. The Paris of Renoir is warm, it's carefree, it's a sunny day, whereas here we have the middle classes in their dark clothes on a rainy day, where we feel that the buildings themselves are going to come into collision with us. So it's a city which is not welcoming. It's a city which has a power over us, not at all a place where one would like to be, although I wouldn't mind at the moment. He also had a property just across the river from Monet, and at the end of their lives, or at the end of his life, because he dies in his 40s, he was swapping seedlings with Monet. They used to go to sort of garden exhibitions together. So and he actually had a wonderful garden as well. Now, he spends a lot of his time actually rowing and designing boats and builds them. He's an engineer by trade and only comes into painting later on. He doesn't actually have to sell his work because he is wealthy, so he can indulge his lifestyle. Now, if any of you are interested in Cabot, I've done a lecture on him, and in the Travels Through Time YouTube. I think it's called From a Different Perspective. There's an hour and a half on KBOT. He, at Argenteuil in 1875, he paints very much in the Impressionist style. He's influenced by this group now, and he paints the way in which the light is broken up, or the water reflecting light breaks up completely. But you can see he's someone who understands how to sail a boat and how the wind will work. Whereas Renoir is really just interested very much in the reflection of light. I mean, and this is a very stationary boat, and Monet is as well, but they all painted at exactly the same spot. There's another railway bridge. Well, now we go into Hélène André. Now, she is the only person who is actually looking out at the spectator and is not engaged in anyone else. Now, she was a very well-known model, first of all, and actress. She started out her career just simply, you know, the models really were basically people who, you know, were chosen from the street square. Often painters would see them in the street and ask them to come and model. But she would have started out as, you know, also probably, you know, sleeping with her way up. Here, this was, Gervex paints her here in this particular mode. This was considered scandalous because, of course, she is obviously a woman who's taken off her clothes. She's not a nude. She's someone who's naked, and you have, you know, obviously we know what's been going on. Her corset is here and so on. She, however, makes her way into the Impressionist group and becomes very friendly with Degas. And she is the model for the absinthe drinkers. Actually, it's called In the Cafe originally. It's the English who call it the absinthe drinkers, as they were obsessed with the idea of the decadent French. Now, on the table of the luncheon of the boating party, we have an absinthe glass. So people would have been drinking absinthe as well as wine. So this is an absinthe glass. You actually have an absinthe spoon here. So this was a drink. I'd better get a move on with this. Was very, very popular during the Second Empire. Right? Those of you who've been with me to Paris will have actually had one of these drinks. You have the absinthe in the base, you put a slotted spoon over the top, then you put sugar on the slotted spoon, and then the iced water is dripped in, and the absinthe becomes cloudy and it releases this wonderful sort of aroma, licoricey aroma. Now, absinthe was originally made with wormwood, which is supposed to actually have some kind of hallucinogenic properties, but basically the drink was manufactured with something like 75% proof alcohol, so whether it doesn't matter really what it had in it, it would have sent you into a bit of a spin. Now, it was when the French colonial armies were going out into North Africa, they sent out with their heroes, or the French Foreign Legion, you know, cases of absinthe, because it was supposed to be good for worms, it was supposed to be good for all sorts of, you know, everything down to sort of ingrowing toenails, but mainly also I think it made you so, they were so drunk that they could actually put up with fighting in the desert and the cruelties that they had to inflict on the locals, and in fact for which they were recipient. But when they actually conquered North Africa and they came back, our glorious heroes came back and brought with this drink. So it became now sort of sold as something incredibly sort of, you know, patriotic and very something that was sort of cutting edge, but it was also being drunk because in the middle of the 19th century, the vines in France had caught this bug, the Phylloxera bug, and had been destroyed. And so wine was actually too expensive for the workers to drink, and so they turned to absinthe. So there was a coincidence then of absinthe being drunk by the upper classes, and then a very, you know, downward what would you call, adulterated form being drunk by the workers. So it starts out being something which is fantastic. Here you have all of the paraphernalia. He's fat and prosperous, and this woman thinks it's great, you know, and this has even got oxygen in it. It's my health. Then it's seen as very respectable. She's saying it's my péché mignon, it's my little secret, my little tipple. And as you can see, she's awfully respectable. She's got the corset on and the gloves and drinking absinthe. But in fact, even the cats like it. But basically, by the end of the century, there are two phenomena that take place. First of all, the people who actually owned the vines wanted wine to come back as the main staple drink. And so there was a campaign against absinthe to try and get people back drinking wine. But also there was a huge problem with alcoholism because the workers who'd been pushed to the outskirts of Paris during the Haussmannisation in the 1850s had turned to these adulterated drinks, often that had boot polish and all sorts of things in them. And there was huge problems of alcoholism. And here you see, so absinthe is seen as evil, and of course it's a woman in the form of a woman. And in fact, by 1815, it is banned completely because of the problems. It's seen as one of the reasons why France is defeated in 1871, and why France, you know, going up to the First World War, of course, also is in a bad way. So it's not the fault of the French army or the French, it's because of absinthe. And so you can hear absinthe is banned. And here you have, you know, Vive la France, with absinthe seen as a prostitute. But on the table of these rather sophisticated, trendy people in 1881, you're going to have absinthe and wine as well. Now, we also have Jeanne Samaret over here, who is another well-known actress. Hélène André, apart from being, ends up traveling, you know, an actress who actually travels through America, and she was very, very well known. Jeanne Samaret was actually as well known as Sarah Bernhardt in her day. We don't hear much about her. I like this because her hair looks as messy as mine. So, but this is what she really looks like, and this is sort of how she's depicted by Renoir. Now, Renoir has a number of quotes. I would never have taken up painting if women didn't have breasts. And when I've painted a woman's bottom so that I want to touch it, then that painting is finished. So there's this sort of, you know, her face really is very little interest here. She's sort of seen basically as flesh, as indeed most of Renoir's nudes are. This is Jeanne Samaret at the beginning of her career. By the end of her career, she is extremely successful. She's a serious actress. You know, she acts in Molière. She's at the Comédie Française. And dies quite young of typhoid fever, but having actually written a book. So this is her when she is a well-known actress. So this is just after the painting of the boating house. Now she's actually in this painting as well. Who are we looking at here? Yes, well, we're looking at Angèle Legault, who is a flower seller, a singer, and a model. And I wanted to look at the hats that these people are wearing. Now, will I go on to this? Hats were, as you'll see, actually, if I go back to, if I got one of the things, everyone's wearing a hat, with the exception of this man here. Everyone has a hat, even though they're outside and they're in the shade. One always wore a hat when one was in company. Now, oh, sorry, I'm going backwards, aren't I? Yes. All right, so we see a varying number of hats. Now, Degas was fascinated by hats, and they appear in many of his works. And this is because milliners, there was something like 800 milliners in Paris, you know, shops, 80 in the center of Paris, and something like 20,000 girls were milliners. Now, this is the time when France, at least Paris, was being reconstructed and was drawing all of the people from the countryside, and the young girls would come up and they would do several things, one of which was to learn to make artificial flowers. And once they were able to make artificial flowers, they then would go on to becoming milliners. So this was actually not just a sort of a working class thing. It was considered quite a skilled trade, as everyone wore these extraordinary hats. And the kind of things that would be on these hats would be silk flowers, and made of velvet and silk and straw, into all different types of flowers. In the background you have here, they actually used to have feathers in particular. You'd have entire stuffed birds stuck on your hat. And the hat that you had very much reflected your role in society. Now, Degas is here looking at this would be a milliner. This is not someone who is about to try on a hat. And the foreground, this is a painting of hats. Now, I just wanted to show you that also at this time you had the development of chromolithography and the beginning of coloured magazines coming out. And so these are fashion plates sort of showing you all of the different types of hats. These are all quite small, but you will see this is very much like the one that Aline Charigot is wearing. And this one is very much like one of the others as well. Now, am I going in the right direction? This is Alain André, looking mildly ridiculous to our eyes, with a hat with an extraordinary amount of false flowers. Now, these little girls who actually didn't make it into becoming milliners, of course, were often prostitutes, become part-time prostitutes, because prostitute's not the right word. They actually had to sell themselves because they really didn't have and didn't make enough money by making these flowers to actually be able to pay the rent. Now I go backwards, don't I? Now I just wanted to look at the different types of hats. So this hat that we have here, these boating hats, of course, were incredibly fashionable because this showed that you were a sporting person. You know, it was for women, I suppose, it was to keep their skin white, but this was to show that you were one of these people who nonchalantly understood the importance of the outdoors. Now, this is Raoul Barbier, who's in the painting. We'll talk about him in a moment. There were many types of hats for men. Well, not many, but you had the sporting hat that you had here, and this is the bowler hat. Now, this is often used, in fact, it was used usually for the working classes. It was a kind of felt hat, which was a modification of the bowler hat, which had been introduced in London. But the bohemians and those who were sort of very trendy, as this group is, would also be sporting a kind of working class hat, you know, to sort of the kind of, you know, not exactly the cut jeans that you have, ripped jeans that you have now, but that sort of thing. And the other kind of hat that you would have had if you were a middle class person or an upper class person was this kind of hat, which originally was made out of a kind of fur and then eventually made out of silk. It was favoured by the middle classes because, of course, it was very, it made you look taller, it stuck on your head, it gave you that sort of uprightness and visibility, and definitely marked your class. If you walked past in one of these hats, you were clearly distinguished on the street from people wearing just bowler hats. So who are we looking at now? Renoir's wife, Aline Charigot, and future wife. Now, I think I'm actually going to talk about dogs. Now, why is she with a dog? I mean, everyone else is chatting, having a great time, flirting, and she's just flirting with a dog. Why? I mean, we all know dogs are cute, but what is this? Now, the dog that she has was a black Elfenpincher, which is no longer a very popular breed, but the dog is actually made to look much smaller and cuter. Now, I just want to very quickly, I realise that time is getting on, very much getting on, is that the importance of dogs in the middle, about the 1870s onwards, they become not just simply objects or hunting dogs or objects of class, but are symbolic of one's, or particularly of women's role in society. But also here you have, I mean, you all know I've got a little dog that looks like this, and I was going to put one of my dog, and I was very good and didn't. But here you have Renoir, who actually paints a portrait of a dog, as does Manet as well. So the dogs now, these are non-working dogs who are simply pets. Now, this is a time where you have very much these separate spheres between male and female, where the bourgeois woman is someone who stays inside, who has the domestic role, who is seen also as physically weaker and also intellectually and emotionally weaker. I think you all know this idea that you shouldn't educate women because the blood will rush from their head, from their womb up to their head, and they won't be able to produce children. So at this time, then you have this infantilization of women. And the sort of symbol of this childishness, this cuteness, this women as the sort of object of affection is the small dog. And I think this painting actually does it perfectly. You have a woman who is clearly not able really to sort of go and play any sport or even walk very far because she's totally impeded by her corsets, by her skirts, forget about the upbringing and all the rest of it, and her diet and so on. And so she's not going to fare very much better outside than this tiny little dog here, who really wouldn't be able to sort of hold its own without protection against, big working dogs, which would be out on the streets. So dogs was supposed to be, like women, domesticated, dumb, decorative, dutiful, and cute, and something kept indoors. And this was at a time when you actually have, in England, you've got the same thing, whereas the pets are imbued here with the emotional side of women. So here you have this dog who's actually pleading because the little girl's being punished, and the dog sort of saying, oh, what a pity. So there's this relationship between emotion and pets. And Haussmann actually, when he's actually constructing Paris, is really quite alarmed by the number of stray dogs in the centre, and in fact even in the outskirts. And so he tries to get rid of them, and then puts a tax on dog keeping. And so having a totally useless little dog means that you have to pay for it, and it also then becomes a status symbol. And then you actually start getting people having outfits for dogs. And I did actually a whole lecture on on pets about probably about 8 or 9 years ago, and you know, showing outfits for pets, and ha ha ha, isn't it ridiculous? Well, I mean, you just go to Kmart now and you've got a whole section of jean outfits for dogs and so on. So I mean, we're going in the same direction. But anyhow, their pets became so important that there actually is a pet cemetery which was developed in 1898, which is just outside Paris at Agnes, by a really interesting woman. And you know, I'm writing this book, or trying to, and she's actually one of the women who's going to figure in it. She was a great feminist, and also used to patrol the streets putting up feminist signs with a pet lion whom she called Tiger. Anyway, she actually gives a lot of money for this. And here here are the graves of these dogs. You can see the dead dog here. To the memory of my dear Emma, faithful and sole companion of my otherwise rootless and desolate life. Well, there we have it. Now, once I start on a subject, I can't let it go. The Duchess of Castiglione's dogs were stuffed, you know, as well. They used to sort of stuff dogs, would sit around. And even in post-mortem photography, you know how, I actually thought this was a post-mortem picture of the dog, but I realized that in actual fact, it was a post-mortem picture of the sister. I think we'll leave that one. All right, well, going back to Aline Charigot, all right, so here, the fact that she's actually playing with this extremely small dog shows her cuteness, her, you know, her unworldliness. Everyone else is actually talking. So here we have what Renoir loves best, someone who is under 19. I mean, after you turn 19, you're a bit long in the tooth or long in the breast or whatever. And as I sort of said, he is not really interested in women as thinkers. He said, I consider women who are authors, lawyers, or politicians to be monsters. When women were slaves, they were really mistresses. So here we have her, very, very young. The emphasis is on this, you know, tactic, you know, you can feel the sort of flesh, you know, he loves running his fingers over it. I think I said, I never think I've finished a nude until I feel I could pinch it. All right, and they always have red hair as well. That was another thing. She, so who is she? Well, he meets her in Montmartre, or in the 9th actually. She's she's come down from the north to work as a milliner, one of these people who we were talking about before. She then serves as his model, and they will have several children. Here she's in the country dads. She's always rather overweight, as you can see. Now she is, for him, this idea of what women are. They are flesh, and they are there to produce children. I mean, which again is flesh. And here you have this rather hefty baby. The face is really of no significance whatsoever. He doesn't paint her very often. She ends up with diabetes, and looks after him in his old age. Now, they have 3 sons, 2 of whom are here. The eldest, Pierre, will become a well-known actor and works in the cinema. The second is Jean, is the writer of Renoir, My Father, and is one of the leading cinematographer of the day, famous. And the third one, Claude, who is much younger, becomes quite a well-known potter. And you still have in the Renoir family potters and film producers. This is Gabrielle, who was Aline's cousin, who was brought down to look after the children and to look after Renoir, of course. You know, he sort of, anything that moved was not safe, really. So here's the last child. Now, Renoir, in the age of 70, had already developed, I think, in about 1900, severe arthritis, and his fingers are beginning to look a bit like mine, actually. He couldn't paint. He found it very, very difficult, and had to be really looked after, you know, put in a chair. I think his hands had to be bandaged and so on, but he continued painting right into the end of his life. But he came from Paris in about 1906 and comes to live at Cagnes-sur-Mer at the house called Les Colettes. And I think a lot of you have been with me to his house. And at the end of his life, he has given up completely on landscapes and has gone back to painting these eternal scenes of women sort of wallowing in nature. And you can see the influence of Rubens here. Anyway, not my taste, but anyway. And this, of course, the background here is these women in nature at his house. I'm sorry, I'm a bit going over time. This is Aline later on in life with a puppy. Well, we now go into these other people who I will get rid of fairly quickly. We have Charles Efrussi. We have him here at the back. Now, he was a very important person. Now, he's someone who comes from one of the very wealthy Jewish families from Odessa. They trade in grain. His father and his uncle come to Paris, and they set themselves up here. They become part of the upper classes of the bourgeoisie. Those of you who are interested in him could read The Hair with the Amber Eyes, which is about a descendant of his. And a very interesting book about the Efrussis. He lives on Parc Monceau and is very influential in the art circles. He will be one of the leading writers or art critics in the Gazette des Beaux-Arts, and also collects in the 1880s, when he's actually shown in that painting, begins to collect Impressionist art. However, he also, much to the Impressionists' dismay, continues to collect symbolic art and others as well. He also is the great collector of Japanese art and the little Japanese tushkis, or whatever they're called. Now, he dies without children, and a lot of his money will go to his relatives, and the Villa Efrussi, Rothschild Efrussi, on the Cap Saint-Jean-Ferrat, is one of his relatives. Opposite him is Jules Laforgue, who is a poet who becomes the secretary of Charles Efrussi. And you can see by his hat, look, he's not the upper class, but he's probably part of this bohemian group. He's actually from Uruguay, one of 11 children, comes over, his parents die, and he finally makes his way and becomes one of the great symbolist poets of France. And he attempts to write in a kind of style which is going to reflect Impressionism in words. All right, so you can see it's a very interesting group that we have. Now, the other people that we have here are his friends. That's Raoul Barbier, who's a former mayor of Saigon, owns race horses. Who else are we going to look at? These people here, these three people here. Adrien Maggiolo is a journalist and a friend of Renoir, and he actually appears here. Renoir uses his friends constantly, so even in 1876 he was being depicted. Pierre Lestrange, a government official, dabbler in the occult. His son also will become a prominent minister in the government. And Paul Lot, who is an artist and a close friend of Renoir. And you'll see him in this rather lovely dance at Bougival. And the model here is a former mistress of Renoir and not a mistress of Degas, but of Toulouse-Lautrec, Suzanne Valadon, who also is a painter in her own right. Now, the country dance, Aline actually became rather jealous. This is Paul Lot, but Aline Charigot, who was eventually married by Renoir, becomes very jealous of her company, and so insists that the country dance, it be she who is figured there. So you have Paul Lot here, and the rather ungainly Aline in this painting. So, all right, we have then basically, we've gone through all of these people and sort of analyze the painting, I suppose, and you will have to admit that it holds together technically from the point of view of the different genres, still life, portraits, still life, landscape and portraits, the way in which it actually uses vanishing points. You know, we don't usually talk about this when we're talking about Impressionist art, but it definitely uses points, vanishing point at the end, uses anchoring points again with triangles taken out of Renaissance art. But it also depicts a special moment in a Paris which is trying to find a way forward after the traumas of the Commune and before the ultimate trauma in the trenches of 1915. So we have this moment which is frozen in life, and which I think still speaks to us today. You can see yourself on the deck, having a glass of Pinot, talking to your friends. It is not very different. But Renoir says, to my mind, a picture should be something pleasant, cheerful, and pretty. Yes, pretty. There are too many unpleasant things in life as it is without creating still more of them. A painting requires a little mystery, some vagueness, some fantasy. When you always make your meaning perfectly clear, you end up boring people. I hope I haven't done that. What I like about painting is that it has an air of eternity about it. I like a painting that makes me want to stroll in it, if it's a landscape, or stroke a breast or a back if it's a figure. I like to fondle a picture and run my hand across it. Well, that was how we will leave Paris. And next week, we will be doing something very, very different with Veronese and a different table and a different celebration of friends coming together.